Hey gang, today's show is brought to you by Fanly, the new app that's changing the landscape for sports apps. If you're tired of the big media companies and their slow, clunky sports apps, switch over to Fanly like I did. It's available for Apple and Android, and it curates more than 2,000 sources to provide the news, highlights, and tweets you want about your favorite teams, and it does it quickly with a sleek design that doesn't get in the way. Best of all, it's free. That's Fanly, Fanly. Download it now. Let's get to the show.
It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Yeah. All right. Welcome in. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Hey, my ranks are up for week one. What a refreshing change to actually have real football to speculate on. Of course, it'll be even more refreshing when we actually see the teams play games that matter, because then we'll actually know what their plans are. You know, I get a whole lot of tweets at Harris Football where it's like, you dummy, don't you know Tevin Coleman was named the starter? And my response is, say it with me, don't believe anything teams say. I'm not saying Coleman isn't the starter. I'm saying I can't fill out a lineup assuming that the teams are telling me the truth. And that would be my overriding philosophies for starting lineups in week one, gang. Don't assume anything you're being told is the truth. You don't have to assume all your players are going to be benched or anything. Just don't assume. If you've got a player in a questionable depth chart situation, that player gets a little demerit this week until we see what his actual role is. He's not a must bench. He just gets a demerit when comparing him against guys we know will play.
Today's kickoff.
Indeed, this is a rankings show, as all Wednesdays will be during the season. My week one ranks are available now at harrisfootball.com, and ranks are what we'll talk about all show long. Specifically, I'm going to tackle some common questions I get from listeners about my ranks, so we can hopefully hit on some of the more controversial, or at least asked about players. And then Sigmund Bloom of footballguys.com, he's going to be on, and we'll loop in some of his rankings and engage in some lively debate. Starting with tomorrow's show, we'll begin our Thursday tradition of having our DFS expert, Craig Clark, on. And we're going to talk about our favorite picks for DraftKings.com, which is why it'll be that much more fun if you open a DraftKings account today. I spent all last season playing on DraftKings and had a blast. It wasn't like I wagered a ton of money. Usually it was like $10 a week, but I had a blast, which is why I'm psyched to talk about DraftKings salaries each week on the show to share in the fun. Yes, someone is going to win $2 million in week one. And if it turns out to be you, I am officially requesting a visit to your new yacht. But even if you don't win the big money, I know you'll have fun at DraftKings. It uses different muscles than your season-long fantasy squad, and it makes Sunday all the more fun. And if you go to DraftKings.com and use my promo code Harris, you'll get a free entry. So go on over to DraftKings.com and use the promo code HARRIS. Okay, so a couple of fun side notes. First, you know all those wacky parody accounts that the little podcast that could has spawned? A bunch of them are getting together with cousin Josh Wednesday night, and they're going to have a 12-team draft and run a league called the Meme Factory, which is a great name. Very psyched to hear how that league turns out. Also, Thursday night, an hour before Steelers-Patriots, I'm going to do a video chat where I answer your week one questions. It'll be live streaming video on the web. I'll tweet the link right around 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be free, and you'll get to ask me some questions, so that'll be fun. Here's a topic that Richard Leonard sent via email to heyharris@harrisfootball.com. Richard says, wondering if you could discuss the process you went through to project the Eagles' offensive players. With so many new pieces coming into the team and the uniqueness of Kelly's system, what influenced your thought process more? Individual skill, the system, the interrelationship of the players within the system, etc. It is a good topic, Richard, and it's one that a lot of tweeters have been interested in. The short answer is that, again, until we see them play, it's all projection, and that's true pretty much for any new situation. But the longer answer is, you're right. It's rare for an NFL team to turn over almost their entire skill position core. Nick Foles, LaShawn McCoy, Jeremy Maclin, they're gone. Sam Bradford, DeMarco Murray, Ryan Matthews, Nelson Aguilar, they're all in. And that means while we think we have a handle on what Kelly wants to do, that's a whole lot of new faces, and to some extent, we'll just have to see. So what does Kelly want to do? Or rather, what has he wanted to do in the past? Beyond the mantra that we all know, which is playing fast, Kelly wants to stretch horizontally as well as vertically. So on running plays, he calls a lot of outside zone runs, or at least he has in the past called a lot of outside zone runs, giving his running backs the task of stretching toward the sideline, then cutting upfield when he sees a window. Passing on early downs, he likes the quick hits, bubble screens, quick slot hooks, short crosses, running back screens. And then, of course, later downs, he'll go down the field like any other NFL team. And all this does happen with great pace. They want to go no huddle and fast, fast, fast. In rating all this new Eagles personnel, I say to myself, okay, I think Bradford has a quick release and a solid head on his shoulders, as it were. Maybe his kneecaps aren't that solid, but I think his quarterback thinking cap is pretty good. So if he stays healthy, which he won't, but, if he stays healthy, I think he can at least run this offense as well as a pretty mediocre talent like Nick Foles. I say Murray, actually pretty perfect for a one-cut scheme if the offensive line stays healthy and does its job. Jordan Matthews is the lone holdover, and early expectations are that he'll have a similar slot role, so that feels pretty stable. And then the outside receiving. That's the big question. Will Aguilar be Maclin? I don't know. That for me is pretty tough to swallow right away. Maybe the Eagles wind up with a rotation on the outside. Riley Cooper, Josh Huff, Miles Austin. Maybe they all, thread in there with Nelson Aguilar and get in his way of being a great fantasy player. Starting on Monday night that's what we're going to start to see. For me, Aguilar, therefore, is the guy who has the most risk. But if he's got Maclin's upside, Maclin finished 9th among fantasy receivers last year, so that kind of upside would be pretty cool. Off the top, you heard me talk about Fanly, and here's my pitch again. I challenge you to download Fanly for free for Apple or Android. Use it for a few days, and then go back to the sports app you were using. I bet you won't. Just like the little podcast that could, Fanly is a startup that's shaking up the big boys. In Fanly's case, they're changing the landscape of how news, scores, and highlights get delivered. No more waiting a minute for your big media sports app to load. No more dumb navigation. No more clunky design. Fanly loads quick and gives you everything you want about your favorite teams and nothing you don't need. So seriously, let's call it the Fanly Challenge. Download it right now, play with it for a couple days, and then see if you can stomach the idea of going back to your old sports app. I promise you, I am not going back. That's Fanly. Get it for free, Fanly.
It's time for Rankings Talk.
So you don't need me to run down the list of my ranks. That's what the website is for, harrisfootball.com. We've got my standard scoring and PPR ranks up there, and ranks from now until the end of the season. Should help you with trades. I know some folks are disappointed we didn't post flex ranks, but here's the deal. In the end, while I do have help, I am the only full-time employee of the little podcast that could, and sometimes it comes down to I don't have enough hours in the day to maintain and edit all these lists and still watch film, do a podcast, etc. So something had to give, and unfortunately it was flex ranks in the future. I'll be able to generate them, hopefully, but right now it was just a little too overwhelming to maintain yet one more list. So rather than me go, number 1, Eddie Lacy, number 2, Adrian Peterson, not exactly a scintillating podcast material, the way I'm going to get at the key pressure points in a given week's ranks is to answer your questions and hopefully be universal enough in my selection of the questions that lots of folks who are listening will also benefit. So here we go. Rob Silverstein asks, may I ask why you have DeAngelo so low? I was leaning on choosing him. Frowny face. DeAngelo Williams, Thursday night's opener. What will the Steelers do with him? Honestly, we don't know. Remember earlier in the show when I talked about not feeling real comfortable with players in new roles until we see them in action? D. Willie counts in that regard. If the Steelers are going to use Williams as an analog for Le'Veon Bell, then ranking Williams outside my top 30 running backs for the week is super dumb. I know that Sigmund Bloom, who we're going to talk to in a few minutes, has Williams 12th in his running back ranks. That's totally arguable. My rank of Williams here is just about total paranoia. What if the Steelers just decide, with no Bell, let's just not really even try to have a consistent running game. Let's just throw and see how that goes. This is a personal philosophy thing, being paranoid about relying on dudes in unstable situations week 1. But my rank doesn't mean you can't start him. If your philosophy is more like, heck, I drafted him to be my Bell stand-in, I'm using him, then that's totally fine. I do not have a problem with that. Drew Johnson says, are we assuming Zach Ertz is out? I have him, but I picked up Heath Miller as a plug-in for Thursday if needed. Should I start Miller to be safe? In my initial ranks, I did assume that Ertz's sports hernia surgery would keep him out. Plus, that's a Monday night game. So it appears to me he'd be a really difficult guy to rely on for your starting lineup this week. So I don't think Ertz is doomed for the entire season by any stretch. I do think the fact that the Eagles play Monday night probably saves Ertz owners from themselves, and you can just go ahead and use someone else. And Miller against the Pats with no Martavis Bryant. Sure. I think Miller's kind of limited now as a playmaker, but he should have some workload there, so I'm just fine with him as your week 1 replacement. He's number 13 on my tight end list this week. Kevin Cushing. He asks, you have Dion Lewis as your number 40 running back in standard and your number 44 in point per reception. Does this imply he's more than a third down back? Kevin, honestly, I think what it reflects is total uncertainty about the Pats' backfield. Do I give Lewis a chance at being more than the third down back? I do. For a smaller back, I think he runs powerfully. He's a guy could actually succeed between the tackles if the Pats use him that way. For 1 week, probably not for an entire season. But I think the fact that we're talking in the 40s, plus the fact that I don't have a single New England running back rated above 39th on either of my running back lists, that means obviously we're just throwing darts here. If you or anyone has a gut feeling about which runner here might make a decent fantasy play Thursday night, go ahead and follow it. My gut is silent. Kyle McKinney asks, why do you have Alshon Jeffrey so low? Is that because he's hurt or in contract talks? He should be an unquestionable top 10 wide receiver. Right, so I get a lot of these. Why do you have the guy so low? And then it turns out I have him 14th. So we're talking wide receiver who's, it's splitting hairs. It's 4 spots lower. Who cares if he sports 4 spots lower than you wanted him to be? He's rated as a starter. So, I have him as a starter. You have him as a starter. Go ahead and get him in there as a starter against the Packers week 1. But yeah, the reason I went lower on him this week compared to where I have him in my rest of the season ranks comes down to the calf. Not the contract stuff. I don't play that stuff. With the calf, first off, there is a risk he can't go at all, which is, we have to keep an eye on it as Sunday approaches. But there's also the risk of re-injury. That's not what we need, him going off the field after re-injuring the calf. But again, I rate him as a starter on almost every team he's on, as long as he's active. Brian Carnavale, I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Love the little podcast that could. Generally speaking, where do your top 5 tight ends fall within the wide receiver ranks? Because my league combines them. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so I'll just run through them. I think Gronk would probably be borderline top 10 among receivers, maybe 10th, 11th, something like that. Graham is probably more like between, 15th, maybe closer to 20th for this first week. Baking in the risk because until we see what Seattle's offense is like and how it's changed to possibly accommodate a bigger role for the tight end, we're speculating. Then come your Kelseys, your Bennetts, your Olsons. They're probably on like the outskirts of the top 25, maybe the top 30. There's potential for volume there. Probably less potential for, the one huge play for that a wide receiver can make that, might win you your week. Patrick Filkins says, looks like you do not see Andre Johnson eating into T.Y.'s production too much. Thoughts? So, Patrick, another case where my paranoia is holding me back a little bit. I have Johnson at 25 among receivers in standard scoring, Hilton at 11. I'm not going to redo this entire conversation. If you listened at all in August, you probably heard me express a little bit of concern about AJ coming out of the second half of last year with the Texans when his separation didn't seem to be there anymore. By the same token, I acknowledge that doesn't mean it's gone forever, the separation. He could have been battling injury. He could have been, fatigued. He may be ready to be a huge part of Indy's offense. But again, I have to bake in the risk that he's Reggie Wayne from last season. So for the moment, I'm going to keep a distance between those two Colts receivers in what I think is a really tough spot going to Buffalo. Hilton is going to stay high for me like he usually does because he's got a chance to make a big play against anyone with that incredible speed, and there should be some volume with Andrew Luck. Johnson over the middle of the field, I think it's a little less foolproof, a little less of a good spot for him, and combine that with my preseason worries, and you get a 25 ranking this week. Warren asks, are you not concerned with Jay Stu and the Panthers' awful offensive line and offense as a whole? So I have Stewart 10th on my standard scoring running back list for week 1. So I'm starting him, and, frankly, anyone who drafted Stu Beef looks at a matchup against the Jags this week and says, yeah, I'm starting him. This is the reason I drafted him. I'm going to use him when he's healthy. Because, of course, we do not know how long that'll be. Ability-wise, as I've said, when healthy, Stewart really lines up with nearly any back in the league with that combo of size and shiftiness. But that's not really what Warren was asking. He was asking about the Panthers' offense and their line. And yeah, it's a big unknown. I don't think I can look at the line and promise it's terrible, or I guess put it this way, I don't think it's way worse than last year's line. All right, now I'm thinking about that. Michael Orr is playing left tackle. Maybe it is way worse. They do have a rookie back there, DeAngelo Williams, who looked okay in the preseason. Hopefully Ryan Khalil, the center, is back from his knee injury to play week 1. That's not guaranteed. Man, maybe I am talking myself into being more concerned about that line than I was. Thanks a lot, Warren. But yeah, I get it, being worried, but I can't look at the Jags on paper and definitely see a defense that I know is much better. If they are, if I see it on film, I'll start to believe. But, put it this way, I know I own Stewart in La Liga, Lebowski, and I am certainly going to give him run in week 1. Christopher Wolf asks, why so low on Rashad Jennings in a PPR? Will be a high-scoring game, and he's the lead back and an excellent catcher out of the backfield. He is a good pass catcher, Christopher, but unfortunately for him, the Giants signed a better one in free agency. That's Shane Vereen. I have Jennings 25th in standard scoring this week, 31st in PPR, while Vereen is 40th in PPR, which pretty much captures the idea that I don't know what the heck will happen in that Giants backfield. Again, uncertainty scaring me off a little bit. I look at Giants-Cowboys like you do and expect some points for sure. Two defenses that don't look very good to me at all, but how will this shake out? I can see a scenario where Vereen is on the field a lot. If the Giants spread out Dallas and just keep rolling with 3 wide and Vereen in the backfield and throw, that short passing game that I think the Cowboys may just be helpless to stop. And then you mix in Andre Williams to steal a short touchdown because Tom Coughlin just likes messing with us. I agree Jennings is the best back the Giants have, but his usage really is a big question mark going into the season. All right, let's go a little quicker and get to more of your rankings issues, and hopefully we'll hit on some of the issues our listeners are thinking about for their own teams. Scott Youngblood says, you have the Panthers' defense very low. Is that due to Jacksonville's improved offense, injuries to the Panthers' defense, game flow, or something else? And Jeremy Stimson also says, hey, Christopher, why not higher on Carolina's D against the Jags? I don't know. I have the Panthers 13th, which to me doesn't feel very low at all, given that they weren't a great unit last year. They could be missing both of their starting corners in week 1, although it sounds like Peanut Tillman will be cleared in time to play. He'll be all right, at least for a 34-year-old starting corner. I'll say this. I guarantee if they weren't facing Jacksonville, they wouldn't even be 13th. They'd be lower than that. I don't trust that unit all that much. But yeah, I'd say, if you're asking why they wouldn't even be higher, maybe somewhat about injuries and somewhat just about not thinking they're all that good. Daniel Carroll, Jameis Winston at home against the Titans with all those weapons, yet he doesn't make your top 26? He's the goal line back. I think he didn't make the top 25. But it makes me laugh in a friendly way, Daniel, that you have such confidence. You know for sure that he's the goal line back. Don't you know it? I'll just say Winston did not look good in the preseason, and that's certainly not the be-all barometer. It really wasn't good. I think I'm going to give him a rest in fantasy leagues until I see him actually playing at an NFL level. Sheridan Allen sends an email. How high does Tevin Coleman or Isaiah Crowell rise in your ranks if Devontae Freeman or Duke Johnson are ruled out for week 1? That's a good one, Sheridan. And I will definitely be adjusting all my ranks all the way from Tuesday night until Sunday morning based on injuries and everything else. I have Crowell 24th among standard league running backs. Tough for me to go much higher than that when I have such doubts about the Browns overall, and the Jets defense looks pretty good. So that's about probably where Crowell's going to be. As for Coleman, I agree. I think he'd have to go higher. He would if Freeman isn't in there. Probably from 31st, where he is right now, up to maybe the mid-20s, but probably not any higher than that. The Eagles have a very good front seven. It was really good last year. So it wouldn't be a cake matchup for Coleman, even if he was the undisputed main man. Mad Matt asks, Amendola doesn't make your top 50 point per reception? Brady's number 2 receiver in what should be a pass-happy offense? So I always get tweets like this, and the fact is, I am wrong sometimes, very occasionally, once every month or season or so. If you have a strong feeling about a guy like Amendola, I can't argue, especially when they haven't played a game that counts yet. But, history seems to be on my side, because every time people count on Amendola, I just go back to last year. The Pats needed him big time. They really needed him, and he could barely get in the field. No Brandon LaFell, so maybe Amendola gets a chance to step up, but does he have a duplication of effort with Julian Edelman, and maybe they need an outside receiver, and enough questions where I'm not using Amendola this week. We'll see. Paul Hansen, if you think Rodgers is the number 1 quarterback, shouldn't Devontae and Cobb be a bit higher? So the short answer is no. I think it's definitely possible for a guy like Rodgers to spread it around enough so that none of his weapons are number 1, but he's still number 1. I don't know how much higher than 8th among receivers you need Cobb to be. That's pretty high. And Adams is 22 on my receiver list in a standard league because, again, we're not sure how it's going to work out. I think you have to bake in a little bit of risk there. That's how I think about it anyway. What if James Jones comes in and he's the number 2 receiver? That's definitely a possibility. And lastly, Josh Medina says, Tannehill at 11 versus Washington. Is that front 7 going to give him problems? Which I assume that tweet means that Josh thinks Tannehill should be higher. I think it's probably a pretty good day on Sunday for the Dolphins. But do I think it's a truly great offense? Probably not. I don't view them as bulletproof, and I don't think Tannehill is the kind of quarterback who's ready to give you 30 fantasy points if he's got a favorable matchup. But again, if you have him 8th and I have him 11th, meh, what's the difference? Tannehill generally strikes me as safe floor, limited ceiling.
Today's guest.
And today's guest is Sigmund Bloom from footballguys.com, the gadfly. Well, there's a lot of gadflies, but you are a gadfly of the fantasy world, aren't you?
I am. I like my social circles. I like people. As we talked about before we went on the air, I like to talk. A lot of my Twitter feed comes down to me saying, "Is anybody out there?" Someone says, "Yeah, I'm still here." Cool.
Oh, come on. A lot of people are out there for you. You should follow Sig at Sigmund Bloom and on Twitter, and he's an awesome follow. I follow him, obviously.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk some ranks because you have a bunch of ranks for week 1. I have a bunch of ranks for week 1. And we have much harmony, but we have some players on which we disagree, and it would be fun to hit those tension points.
Sure.
I wanted to start with a question about Thursday night. So I already fielded a question earlier in this show about DeAngelo Williams. I know there's not much else in the Steelers' backfield, but he scares me so much to use him week 1. But you have him number 12 among running backs. You ain't scared.
No.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, as you said, they don't have anything else. I mean, the backup running back is basically the fullback. DeAngelo Williams can still play. I think that's the main element of this. There's 2 main elements. One, DeAngelo Williams can still play.
Okay.
The other is the Steelers' offense is a potent offense. Even without Marquise Pouncey, Mike Munchak has made me feel a little better about having to patch over Marquise Pouncey for an indefinite period of time. But the other 4 spots are still strong. Now, the Patriots' front 7 is a pretty good front 7, and they've got some hands on deck that they didn't have for parts of last year, like Jared Mayo and Chandler Jones and so on. But I think this is going to be a wild and woolly open kind of game. I think you're going to see a lot of scoring in this game. And I think that DeAngelo Williams, they're not going to change much. I know he's not going to run routes like Le'Veon Bell and make plays in the open field like Le'Veon Bell, but he's going to be part of the offense. I don't think that Roethlisberger's going to throw 55 passes in this game. But if he does, probably 6, 7, 8 of those targets are going to go to DeAngelo Williams out of the backfield too. So I think this is a pretty straightforward, safe play. And I think next week against San Francisco is going to be a straightforward, safe play.
I'm going to feel safer next week. I don't feel safe this week, but I already talked about that earlier in the show. It's a good different perspective because I think maybe folks, according to the reaction on Twitter, I think folks were thinking I was going to have him rated higher. You've made your call, at least your early call, between Amir Abdullah and Joik Bell. You have Abdullah in a standard league, not even PPR, I think. Are your ranks PPR or are they standard?
Well, we do projections of base stat lines, and you can toggle between PPR and non-PPR. And I try to look at both, but I do think that the rankings should be a basic guide of confidence, not just the specific data point of projections, because confidence, I always do my rankings, and I want to emphasize this about week 1. As doing spots like this with you and answering questions like I do on my radio spots is really important in a week like week 1, because I put together my initial rankings and then I resort them and look at tiers and sort them out. But then sometimes when people ask me a question, they're like, you have this guy ahead of this guy. I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure I really believe that. week one is the week
where you really don't believe
the lowest
that.
confidence.
That's right.
Yeah, we have really low confidence, and we're trying to really be conservative. And if we're splitting the baby, we should really try to avoid doing that. But if we're splitting the baby as a default, it's week 1 that we do that.
Yeah, but you're not splitting the baby on the Lions running backs. You think Abdullah, at least for week 1, maybe it's Bell. There's just risk that he's not ready to go. How do you come down, on those Lions running backs?
Yeah, well, I think this is basically kind of what you haven't seen is what you aren't sure you'll get kind of situation where we haven't seen Bell play. He's just now returning to practice. He's just now getting back into football shape. Okay, so I don't think the Lions know confidently what they're going to get from Bell. I think we could see any number of scenarios unfold in this game. Okay, one is that Bell's inactive. Honestly, just as the practice week goes on, they're like he's not ready yet. Another one is that he goes out and tests on a few touches and just doesn't look right yet, and they can't use him as much. Another is that he gets hurt early in the game. Again, this early part of coming back from this long layoff since January, and the age he's at, the point he's at in his career, the number of injuries he's had. there's a lot of bad scenarios. Now, there is a scenario where Joique Bell comes out, looks just like Joique Bell, and gets his 20 touches, 4 catches and 16 carries and a goal line touchdown, and he's a good play. But that's just one of many scenarios. Meanwhile, Amir Abdullah, we kind of know what we have. A sensational rookie, one that everybody's excited about. And I think that this Detroit-San Diego game is going to be another sort of high-scoring game. I would expect with Detroit, you don't take the bull by the horns. You're going to pass on them. And I think that San Diego's strength of their offense is when Danny Woodhead's on the field, too. So I could see Woodhead and Amir Abdullah both putting up like 5, 6 catches, 6, 7, 8 targets. 6, 7, 8 carries, 15 touches or so, 70, 80 total yards, chance for some big plays, chance for some red zone touches. But I think that I'm going to say in the background here, this is why I like carrying Zach Zenner at the end of my bench. Because there's a lot of scenarios where Zach Zenner's value, without him even stepping on the field, go up in week 1.
I'm glad you mentioned the Chargers. I'm gonna wind you up and let you go because Danny Woodhead, 18, Melvin Gordon, 33. In my notes, I wrote 3 words. What the what?
Yeah. This is not a Melvin Gordon game. Okay, again, it's Detroit. Go back to look at how a team like New England handled Detroit. You don't try to run right at. Now it's not Ndamukong Suh, it's Haloti Ngata, but they've got tremendous linebackers. You don't try to just run at this front seven. I don't think so. I think you're going to try to poke them to death, perforate them with guys like Stevie Johnson and Danny Woodhead, maybe Ladarius Green, trying to stretch the seam a little bit. Of course, Malcolm Floyd and the chemistry there, Keenan Allen, just peppering the Lions defense with all these short passes. Again, look at the New England Patriots and how they handle them as a blueprint. And Melvin Gordon needs to be rewired. Okay. He's still looked hesitant in the preseason. He's not used to seeing what he's seeing as running plays unfold in the NFL. It's a lot faster. There was that good piece on Kristen Michael where they talked about dark creases and how running backs have to anticipate a hole, like hit a hole that's not there because they know it's going to be there when they hit it. Melvin Gordon's not there yet. So you have the game script that I think is not a Melvin Gordon game script, and it's his first game, and he's going to have to evolve as a running back. This is not the week you want to put a chip on Melvin Gordon.
Interesting. It's interesting. I have him flip-flopped. I went the conventional route with Gordon. And my thought is I don't know yet what a Melvin Gordon game is or isn't, but I get it. I get that if you're putting yourself in the mind of the Lions game planning or the Chargers game planning against each other, I can see where you'd come to the conclusions that you're coming to. I don't think it's crazy. Okay, so you said that on your radio spots that sometimes someone says, really? You'd play this guy over this guy? And then you reconsider and you think, oh, maybe I wouldn't. I got one for you. I don't mean to just pick on you.
No, this is perfect. This is great.
Okay.
This is what I want.
All right, we agree on so much in our ranks, so we should just say there's 90% overlap here. But you would play Steve Smith in week 1 over AJ Green, Amari Cooper, the Bucs receivers. I'm not saying it's wrong because I get it, but I say wow.
Well, again, I'm looking at. I suppose what's emerging as we go through these, and I like these questions because they're making me come up with this theme. And it is about level of confidence, and our level of confidence is somewhat low in week 1 about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And one thing I am confident about, watching Steve Smith in preseason week 3, knowing the size of his spirit, knowing that Baltimore and Denver, there's no love lost, but this is going to be, as much as there's a playoff kind of intensity for week 1, this is going to be one of those games, I think. I think Steve Smith's going to catch 7, 8, 9 passes in this game. I think that he's ready. They have nobody else to throw to, but I think he's ready for that. I think he's ready to go toe-to-toe with Aqib Talib or Chris Harris. And Joe Flacco is not a shy quarterback. Joe Flacco is not going to only throw to Steve Smith when he's wide open. But I think Steve Smith understands what is on him. With no experienced tight end, with no experienced number 2 receiver, there's a lot on him. Now, how are the wide receivers going to shake out for Tampa? I do love Vincent Jackson. I want to see how Mike Evans practices, but I do think that Winston has eyes for Jackson. I won't talk anybody out of playing Vincent Jackson over Steve Smith. I think they're both really terrific plays in similar situations. I just have a little more faith in Steve Smith to answer the bell. And then with A.J. Green, I've got a couple of thoughts here. One is I still have no idea how this Cincinnati offense is going to divide up this pie. And they only have an Andy Dalton-sized spoon to serve it. Okay? So you have, with all hands on deck, what does this offense look like? Marvin Jones, Tyler Eifert, Mohamed Sanu, Giovanni Bernard, even Rex Burkhead is running some routes out of the slot. That's fascinating to me. He's a fascinating player. And, of course, Jeremy Hill. I have no idea how this is going to get divided up. Now, when the bullets start to fly, Dalton may just lean back on A.J. Green, which isn't necessarily a good thing for the Bengals, even though it might be for A.J. Green fantasy owners. Which leads into my other point, I feel like this is a trap game. I feel like this is a game where we're looking at old Oakland, one of the worst teams in the league, a bunch of losers, play like a bunch of losers. I don't think they're that team anymore. I think that Cincinnati coming west, it could potentially get ambushed in the black hole. So I just have a lot of uncertainty of how Cincinnati is going to show up for this game on the road, the black hole, the opener, hope springs eternal. And I'm skeptical. And Andy Dalton, it's funny, Chris, because I was talking this morning with Paul Daner from ESPN about, and Evan Silva and a few others about Cincinnati, and I think I talked to Lance Zierlein on my show yesterday about it, where you look at Cincinnati and you want to project them as an 11 or 12 win team. I mean, you look at the talent on both sides of the ball and the track record, but it's like an equation where X is Andy Dalton and you have to solve for X. And I can't do that yet.
Well, except for the past few years, they've won double-digit games with Andy Dalton. I mean, it seems like it's the same roster. I think there probably are some teams out there where somebody drafted A.J. Green in the second or third round and then drafted Steve Smith in the seventh or eighth round, and I could not tell those people to sit A.J. Green.
I wouldn't tell them. I mean, let me put it this way. I would not say you have to play Steve Smith.
No, you have them close. You have them very close to each other.
Yeah.
This is much more about having Steve Smith high. You don't necessarily have A.J. Green that low.
Yeah, well, it's just having a little bit higher confidence. And I will say this, going back to your point really quickly. What they did in the second half of the year last year, if you look at what Cincinnati did when they got rolling, they beat up on Johnny Manziel with Chicago, with the Cleveland. They beat up.
If only they got to play Cleveland twice.
Well, no, but listen. In Week 10, Cleveland beat them 24-3 in a primetime game.
I remember. Andy Dalton's worst game of his life, I remember.
Yeah. And then in Week 15, there was the whole let's teach Johnny Manziel and everybody who likes Johnny Manziel a lesson and show them how bad he really is right now. And, of course, Cincinnati mulched them. But anyway, they beat up on Houston without Arian Foster, with Ryan Mallett in his second start. They barely beat Tampa Bay. They got lumped on by Pittsburgh. They beat a one-legged Peyton Manning, and then they got beaten by Pittsburgh again. So where are the signature wins of this team? You don't
need signature wins to win 10 games in the NFL anymore.
But against this schedule that they're playing, the AFC West, NFC West, and in the division, I think that it's you're not going to get these Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, which they barely won. Johnny, you're not going to get a lot of these games where you're the prohibitive favorite. Anyway.
Yeah. I still think they're winning double-digit games and still losing in the first round. DeAndre Hopkins, what I don't know about your ranking of Hopkins, I have him 11th this week. You have him 26th. Obviously, that's a big difference. But what I don't know about your feelings about Hopkins is whether this is consistent with how you were feeling about Hopkins throughout August, where obviously neither one of us is going to say we don't like the talent, but we're super concerned about the quarterback. We both would say we don't like the quarterback situation in Houston. So my question isn't so much about Hopkins 26 this week. It's more, was he around that spot in your overall wide receiver ranks for the season?
No. And this is one that's going to be tough because some of this is my trepidation about Brian Hoyer.
Sure.
And the fact that, and I'm really excited about the Texans defense. One of the things I think that hasn't been covered or just drawn enough attention to is how much of a difference Vince Wilfork could make for this defense. Because as it already was, J.J. Watt was like having to block three guys.
I'm a Pats fan, and I have a real question about how much Big Vince has left.
But all he has to do is just clog things up, right?
People have been saying about old nose tackles for a long time.
Sure,
and Ted Washington's the only one I can really remember doing
fair.
it. Yeah.
That's fair. I'm just saying he sets up some choices for opposing offensive lines, and Kansas City's offensive line is not in great shape right now, where you either have to single block Wilfork, or we haven't even talked about whether Jared Crick and Jadeveon Clowney is going to play. And what those guys can do, Whitney Merciless. You already have sort of mismatch numbers because of J.J. Watt and the attention. Anyway, I look at this game in my crystal ball, Chris, and I see this Houston game. I actually just tweeted right before we started recording that I think that the Houston KC game is going to reveal more about how good the Texans defense is going to be than how bad Casey's offense is going to be. Like, don't get, and remember, Casey came out really flat. Remember, Casey lost to Tennessee at home in week 1. It was one of the weirdest games of the whole year because nothing that came after that really adhered to that outcome. So I see the Texans being able to, and Bill O'Brien's going to play it close to the vest when he can. Bill O'Brien is fine with winning games like 12-3. He doesn't, he doesn't care about padding fantasy stats. So you're not going to ask Brian Hoyer to do too much. You're not going to ask him to do any high wire act stuff. Between Blue and Grimes and Polk, these guys might combine for 35 carries for 100 yards, but the point is the 35 carries. John Tari Poe may or may not play. That's a big part of Kansas City's rush defense. So I can see the Texans in the home opener controlling a very boring game. In the games you want DeAndre Hopkins in your lineup, or at least you're confident he's going to be an anchor in your lineup, are the games that you're going to ask Hoyer to do a little bit more. Because Hoyer's a dink and dunk quarterback. Hoyer is not a freewheeling quarterback. And DeAndre Hopkins can win those contested balls and make those high wire act plays that I don't think he's going to be asked to make in this game. And the other thing I'm going to point out here is that Cecil Shorts is healthy for now. They're happy with Nate Washington. I think they're happy with how Jalen Strong is coming along. And where we were looking at DeAndre Hopkins as the only game in town maybe a month or two ago, now I think they've got some pieces falling into place to have some complements. And for a pass offense, you would expect like 25 attempts, maybe. I just don't think Hopkins is a good bet this week.
I guess philosophically we approach this slightly differently, at least on the guys that we differ on, that I usually do not intuit that I'm very good at guessing how games are going to go. Do you know what I mean? Like I've seen too many games where I was sure it was going to be a shootout and it wasn't, or it was going to be a grinded out and it wound up 45-40. So I tend not to mix that in, especially early in the season when I don't feel like we have a good sense about these teams at all. But I respect that you watch a lot of football and you think you have a sense of how this game's going to go. I think you're probably wrong. But, hey, what are you going to say?
Well, the one thing I know it's not going to be is the average of all outcomes. Like, there's never a football game that's just the average of everything that could happen. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how football goes. Football, it's like a string path of hurricane paths. Like, it's gonna follow a certain script.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean the right. I'm not saying it's the wrong approach. It doesn't necessarily mean the right approach is to say, all right, it's going wildly to the left, it's going wildly to the right. The hurricane, sometimes picking the middle at least puts you in the ballpark. The reason it's an average is because on average, this is what this guy's going to do, even though he's maybe not going to do exactly what that average is. That's why there are averages in the world.
Absolutely. And when I have a low sense of confidence, that's when I split the baby. Right. That's when I say I'm just going to pick somewhere around the average. But I do think that if you're not taking at least a stand on a few games each week when you project, then you're missing possibility. I mean, that's like what DFS comes down to, is your level of confidence in plays. Like if you don't commit to some outcome outside of that middle 20 or 30% range, maybe you could win some cash games or something.
50-50, right. I'm really good at the 50-50s. I haven't won the $1 million yet. I'll let you know when.
Right. All right, cool.
So for one last topic, I know we have some listeners who are having to fill in for tight end because maybe they have Antonio Gates and they have a month they've got to worry about, or they have Zach Ertz, and that's a Monday night game, as I mentioned earlier in the show, and so it seems unlikely you'd want to rely on him coming off sports hernia surgery. I wonder if I can get you to wax on. I know it's going to be hard to get you to wax on tight ends, but this week I saw Kyle Rudolph at number 4 on your list, and while I don't think that means he's an awesome play, because let's face it, from probably 4 down to 15, they're almost kind of all the same, makes me think maybe you view Rudolph as one of those lightly owned guys who might be able to fill in for a few games.
Oh no, I think that Rudolph can be better than that. I think that if we're looking at Rudolph honestly. If he stays healthy, and that's like, take the needle off the record, if he stays healthy, because that's been the thing. And that's tight end is such a brutal position. We can say that about Jordan Cameron. We can say that about Dwayne Allen, and so on. But he's a good tight end. Remember, they gave him a big extension recently, last year or two. He's a good player. He was never healthy last year. I don't think at any point we saw Kyle Rudolph at more than 80 or 90% last year. You could tell. I mean, he wasn't moving the way Kyle Rudolph usually moves. In the preseason, he was. So he's healthy for now. He's got a good quarterback. He's got a good offense. Adrian Peterson's going to help open things up in the middle of the field for him. Mike Wallace and Charles Johnson's speed are going to keep the safeties. What a choice for teams playing the Vikings. You put plays in the box to contain Peterson, but then you have Rudolph and you have this speed. And Teddy Bridgewater has the wherewithal to take advantage of that. Now, the Vikings offensive line has a few questions with John Sullivan. Matt Khalil hasn't been playing well. Phil Lodeholt's out. But it's San Francisco, okay? San Francisco's breaking in how many new players on their defense? I see Kyle Rudolph, and then Navarro Bowman does look like he's back. So San Francisco fans, I finally have something nice to say about your team this offseason. Navarro Bowman looks awesome.
To be fair about that defense, though, I mean, we just don't know those players. We don't know they can't play. We just literally don't know them.
Right. I mean, Eric Mangini was a tight end coach last year, and now he's the defensive coordinator.
It doesn't point to a ton of success. I'm just saying that until we see it, like, I won't be shocked if they're competent defensively because it's personnel we don't know.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. But for this week at tight end, because Rudolph's healthy, because I mean, we don't even know what the baseline for a healthy Rudolph with Pete Bridgewater would be.
No,
and
we don't.
We certainly don't know what it would be with guys, again, Peterson, Johnson, Wallace. That means when Rudolph's getting targets, he's probably in one-on-one in a good situation. And also remember, Rudolph had 9 touchdowns with Christian Ponder.
I do remember that.
So is he the number one red zone option? I mean, if I had to put a chip on somebody as the number one red zone option in the passing game, that would be the chip.
I think I might go Charles Johnson, but I can see it. Rudolph is a leaper, and leapers are good in the red zone. Hey, Sig, thanks for doing this. It's fun, and we're gonna, keep having you on, hopefully, pretty regularly.
Absolutely.
You were able to work us into your schedule. What show are you going to be hosting here coming up in a little while? I know, but tell people.
Yeah, no. I mean, we're getting rolling here. I mean, the couches. I'm going to be doing on the couch. This week was Lance the Airline. Chris, you'll be up in the next. Usually we get like once a month rotation, and definitely listeners, loyal listeners to Chris' show will want to check that out. But then during the year, like I'm on in Memphis and Nashville and even places like Bellingham, Washington, and Monroe, Louisiana, because we love talking about this. And when people call in with questions, it helps stress test your beliefs, and that's an important moment. And also, even it gives you an idea of, sometimes people will ask about 2 players that you wouldn't even have close, and you say, well, that's a no-brainer. But then it helps you understand where people's beliefs are, and that's where you might have some opportunity, like, hey, try to trade for this player. If you're asking me if this player is close to this player, that means maybe everyone's underrating this player, and it's time to move on a trade offer. So I love the opportunity to do it. Love the opportunity to appear on a show like yours because it's always so stimulating. And I look forward to us hanging out and talking football a lot in the future.
Awesome. And if I'm in Austin this winter, we'll definitely pal around. That will be fun.
Indeed.
Hey, thanks again. People should follow. I mean, if that didn't convince you, that you should follow Sig. He knows his stuff. It's at Sigmund Bloom. You're really great at this, and thanks very much for being on the show again.
Appreciate the opportunity.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. I think I realized off the top of this show I did not thank you for listening, which obviously means I have now started to big time everyone, because this little podcast that could is so big time. So anyway, Thursday's coming, and that's exciting because there's actually going to be football. For Thursday's podcast, Craig Clark will be on. We're going to talk about our daily fantasy sports picks. And that should be exciting. And then remember, Thursday before the game, 7:30 Eastern, I'm going to tweet out a link to a live video chat where you can ask me whatever, and I will answer whatever. Hey, thanks so much again for listening. I really, really appreciate all of you. You've made this show a success. I can't do it without you and can never express my gratitude. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.